also joined by the people that I'd mentioned last weekend, which are the conveners. So you'll be hearing from Josh and Ruth just after I talk this morning. And their role is to really guide the Assembly members through the process and make sure that all your voices are getting heard. We're also joined by some people from the stewarding group, who are that diverse group of people whose role it is to keep a bit of an oversight on how things are going with the Assembly and to help ensure the Assembly is the best that it can be. And of course, the names of all of these people can be found on the Climate Assembly's website if you wanted to take a look there. We also have our support team. So if there's any support you need at all throughout this weekend, whether it's technical or anything else, they're on hand to give you that support you need. And you should have the contact details to get in touch with them. There's an email address and also a phone number that you can call or text. But you're also really welcome to post anything in the chat here or flag with your facilitators if there's any support that you need, and we'll make sure that we get that to you. We also have our research team that are joining us, so they're going to be with us throughout the process, and hopefully you've all had a chance to meet them now. Some of them will be joining some of the breakout rooms over the course of the weekend, but you'll know if they're in your room, and your facilitators will of course give them space to introduce. We also have our facilitators again, yay! So we have 15 groups again, so we have 15 facilitators for the groups. And you have myself, my name's Kelly, and my colleague Kayla, who are joining you as lead facilitators. So you'll just see us popping us up really throughout the weekend, just talking about process and what it is that we're getting up to. And we have the Secretariat. The Secretariat are the people that are kind of working on the process, making sure it all happens. And they're joining us as well throughout the weekend. And the final group of people I just want to mention are the evidence team, the evidence leads. So you may remember Professor Ian Stewart from last weekend. He gave a bit of an introduction before we heard different pieces of evidence and input. And Ian will be joining us again throughout this weekend to do much of the same and just give you a little bit of information before we get hear from a few more people. But that team has been working together quite hard to ensure that the information that you're hearing about climate change and the climate emergency that is presented to you in a fair and a balanced way that covers a wide range of perspectives. So hopefully that's covered everyone in the room. And as I said, please do get in touch with the support team if there's absolutely any support that you need over the course of this weekend. Right, I'm just going to tell you what we are going to be looking at this weekend, and also just give you a reminder of something called the conversation guidelines, which for those of you that joined us last weekend, you may remember you had a conversation about that in groups and had a chance to come up with what you thought it was important to bear in mind as we were having our discussions and deliberations during our time together. So the question, so this is a question that we must keep in our minds because it is the question that the Assembly is looking at. It's how should Scotland change to tackle the climate emergency in an effective and fair way? So that is our key question throughout the process. We're now on weekend 2 of 6. So we're of course running these 6 weekends through till March, but there is the option for members for you to request a 7th weekend if you feel like that would be helpful for you. Just a recap of last weekend very briefly. So what we looked at last weekend, we had an overview of climate change and the urgency. We looked at our changing climate, what causes it and what are the impacts. We look at what does tackling climate change mean for us and what are the barriers to tackling climate change. We also looked a bit at climate change adaptation, and also mitigation. So this weekend, we're switching our focus to basically the current climate, and we're taking a bit of a look at what's happening in Scotland. So we'll be looking at Scotland's emissions, including negative emissions technology. Where does Scotland's electricity come from? Some of the different levels of action, and we'll be looking a bit at power there. You have a lunch break, of course, very important, between 12 and 1:30, but you'll be able to log on again from 1 o'clock. So please do log on earlier. It really helps us to make sure that we start on time. And then we'll be going in after lunch to looking at mitigation and the introduction to the streams and the key challenges that Ian introduced to you last weekend. So work and travel, home and communities, lifestyle, and diet and land use. So that's today. There's going to be quite a bit of input over the course of the day. So I'll give a reminder at this point. We do really encourage you to capture some notes as we're going through, as you're hearing the evidence. Do it in a way that works for you. That may be written, it may be drawing, it may be in another way. But the most important thing is that you find a way to capture notes as we go through, to remember the key things, and yeah, just make sure it works for you. And then, of course, the evening is your own, and we come back tomorrow, and we'll be kicking off with a film from the Children's Parliament, and we'll have a bit of time in our breakout groups in the morning just to reflect on what we heard there. We'll have some input from the Children's Parliament as we go through. We'll then be moving on to look at adaptation in Scotland, and then policy and finance. Of course, another lunch break. And when we come back after lunch, the first thing to say actually is that we will be at that point inviting members to give a bit of feedback in plenary. So please do start thinking about whether or not you would like to take on a feedback role, because your facilitators will be asking you. And of course, we want to hear your voices, so really encourage you to do it. But we'll then be having another input around what does the Paris Agreement mean for Scotland? And that's actually going to start us thinking off a bit about fairness and effectiveness. So if you remember the key question for the Assembly, the word fair and effective were in there. So that's going to kick off that. And we'll be ending the day by thinking about what is fair in our groups. Okay, so I also just want to say that the thing that's going to happen next when I hand over to the conveners is they're going to give a bit of a welcome this morning, but we are actually also going to show you a video around climate anxiety. So just a heads up that that is coming, because the conveners are going to show the video and also talk to you about a bit of support that's on offer as we're going through. So we really want this to be a supported journey for you all. So please do bear that in mind as that video is playing. Right, it just leaves me then to just remind you of the conversation guidelines. So we're not going to go through them every single time we meet, and I'm not going to read them all out, but I think it's helpful to kind of set the tone for today, and especially for the new members that are joining us. The guidelines themselves will be accessible on your members area of the website that you have the link to, but I'm just going to go through them quickly just to set us up for the morning. So the conversation guidelines, which of course were developed after the conversations you had last weekend, and the suggestions you made are as follows. One person speaking at a time, actively listening to each other, give everyone time to talk, be open to changing your mind, give everyone space and time to express their views, support and encourage others to speak up and say what they think, respect each other's opinions even if you disagree, speak to others like you want others to be spoken to. Be patient, both in conversation and when using technology. Be conscious of other people's sensitivities and keep language respectful. Feel free to be honest. Appreciate our differences. Disagree without being disagreeable. So, you could say, yes, interesting point, but have you thought about this? If someone says something you don't agree with, don't react immediately, but take a few moments to pause, think, and make a considered response. Try to look for similarities and not differences in opinions. Be open to challenge and changing your mind, even if that can be uncomfortable. Please do try and turn your cameras on where possible and stay muted when you're not talking, especially when you're in the main room. Keep on topic and to time. Ask questions. There are no silly questions or answers. And being aware of jargon, using it can be helpful, but important to make sure that everyone understands. Okay, so hopefully that set us up. You're a little bit clearer on what we'll be doing today. But what I'm going to do now is I am going to hand over to Josh. So Josh Littlejohn and Ruth Harvey, remember, are the two conveners that are joining us for this process. So Josh, it's over to you for the welcome.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the second meeting of Scotland's Climate Assembly. Myself and Ruth are here. Our role is to support you all as Assembly members and to basically kind of accompany you on the journey. We know that there was quite a lot of information in the first weekend, and this weekend is also quite full, but we are here to support you. If you have any concerns, then you can talk to us. We run a drop-in session open to any Assembly members on the Monday after an Assembly weekend. There is no obligation to attend this, but if you want to join us, then please do. Over to Ruth. Is Ruth with us?
Sorry, I was muted. Hello, folks. Great to be here. As Josh said, we know there's an awful lot of information to take on board. Some of it may be distressing for some of you, and psychologists have established that for some people, thinking about climate change can cause them to feel some levels of anxiety. And this has got a name, it's called climate anxiety. So we're going to show you a short video now that explains a bit more about what this is. And more importantly, it will share with you, and we'll share it again with you after the video, action you can take to increase your resilience and ways you can contact us and others should you need support. So we're going to show you the video clip now.
Hey, so just again to say welcome. I haven't spoken to you today, but good to see you all here. And we're going to hand over to Ian. You'll remember Ian Stewart, Professor Ian Stewart from last time, who's going to be with us all the way through the process, just to give us a bit of a insight into what we're going to be looking at today.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us on this second weekend of Scotland's Climate Assembly. I'm Ian Stewart, I'm the communications lead, and I'm going to be joining you on this grand learning journey over the next few weeks and months, really. And we've got an exciting weekend ahead today, building on what we learned last time, and also moving forward to really drill down on kind of Scotland today. But today is even more notable because it's the 5th anniversary of the Paris Climate Agreement that we talked about last week. We mentioned it, we'll be hearing about it more tomorrow. So it's an auspicious date for us to continue our discussions. But back to today's proceedings, we're going to talk about Scotland's emissions, electricity generation, the different levels of climate action. And we'll be introduced to the 3 main streams of evidence that we'll spend weekends 3 and 4 looking at in real detail. Tomorrow, as you've heard earlier from Kelly, we're going to learn about adapting to climate change in Scotland and some of the options for how we can pay for climate action, before finishing off the weekend by really diving into what we mean about fairness in relation to climate action. But I thought it would be useful before we get started I've prepared a short video to recap on what we learned during the first weekend of Scotland's Climate Assembly. So if we can run that video, that would be great. So I hope that's a useful recap. I think we're going to go to an icebreaker now. So I'm going to throw back to Kayla or Kelly to take us into that.
Yeah, it's me, it's Kelly. Yeah, so yes, we're just going to go straight into our breakout rooms now, just to say hi to each other and do a short icebreaker activity. And just a reminder of the conversation guidelines before we do that. But production team.
So hopefully that should be everyone back. And just to say, we're now, hopefully you have had a good sort of introduction there. You've managed to have a chat, meet the other people you're going to be working with today. A couple of people have had a couple of little technical problems, but we're trying to get them all sorted out, and hopefully it will all work as we move forward. So we're now really about to begin our evidence sessions for today. So we've got quite a lot of evidence, as we said at the beginning, as Kelly said, and as Ian said, we're going forward, really focusing on Scotland today and what this climate emergency really means if we're talking about in Scotland. So I'm going to hand over to Ian, but before I do that, just to remind everybody, and hopefully everyone got it in their email to start with, that, have a pen and paper handy, or however you want to take notes, however works for you, so that you can note down during the presentations any questions or any key points that are going to be really important to keep in mind as we start thinking about how can Scotland best address the climate emergency. So I'll hand over to Ian to introduce our first presentation.
Thanks, Kayla. Thanks everyone. I hope you did have fun kind of picking up the threads from last week, reflecting on all those different kind of aspects. During that last weekend, one of the things that we talked about a lot were where global emissions came from. But there was a lot of questions from people, quite rightly, about, well, what about Scotland? What about the emissions in Scotland? So now I'm going to hand over to Andy Kerr, who will talk about the main sources of emissions in Scotland. And also I introduced the idea of negative emission technologies and when it might be appropriate to use them. So Andy's prepared a pre-recorded presentation, a video, so if we can play that now. Okay, thanks for that, Andy. As you've heard from Andy, a significant amount of the greenhouse gas emissions in Scotland comes from energy, and that is how we power our transport, produce electricity, and heat our homes. And I thought it might be useful just to share a slide here about which just shows you about that kind of balancing act that we've got in terms of our energy consumption. So this just shows us really. This pie chart shows us that that actually it just shows where the bulk of the energy comes from. Really, you can see that the bulk of the energy usage in Scotland is actually on heat. It's just over half, 52% of the total consumption, with electricity and transport being about a quarter each, 24% of that total. And that's really important because Scotland has been very successful at decarbonising its electricity supply, as you'll hear about in a moment. But decarbonising heat and transport is much trickier. So, as I mentioned before, in terms of energy consumption, heat is the big one really, and that along with transport is really tricky to address. But electricity, and particularly green electricity, is the key. So next we're going to hear from Keith Anderson, who's CEO of Scottish Power, about how the electricity supply in Scotland needs to change to tackle the climate emergency. So if I pass over to Keith, and he can introduce himself.
Hi there. So welcome, and thanks for letting me join you this morning. What we're going to do is just show you a short video, which hopefully it kind of helps to explain visually all of the changes that are going in across the system just now. I'll be around for the rest of the session, so I'm happy to get involved, answer questions on anything you would like at all. But hopefully this short video just explains the size, scale, and shape of the change that's taking place across the whole of the electricity sector.
Thank you. So yeah, thank you very much to Keith Anderson for the video, and of course to Ian for setting us up just before that. So we're going to go again into our breakout groups and have a conversation again, just reflecting on what stuck out to you and what are some of the important things to remember going forward. Just a reminder that all of the video content that you're seeing will be available via the website, so it's available there for you to rewatch should you want to do that at any point. So without further ado, I think we're back into our breakouts.
Thanks for that, Kayla. So we're really going to think about action on climate change, moving away from where the emissions are coming from to what we actually can do about them. So action can be taken at different levels. It can be taken at the business and civil society level, local authority level, and then kind of central government, and that's Scottish and UK government. So next we're going to hear from some of those different levels. We're going to hear from Dan Barlow of Climate Exchange, Councillor Heddle of the Convention of Scottish Local Authorities, who's from Orkney, Sam Gardner of Scottish Power, and Zarina Ahmad of CMVO in Scotland. So I think if we can move across to that, please.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to those inputs from Dan and from Councillor Heddle, who was from COSLA. So just so you know, COSLA, if you didn't see it in the chat, stands for the Convention of Scottish Local Authorities. We also heard from Sam, and we heard from Zarina, who is from CEMVO, which stands for the Council of Ethnic Minority Voluntary Sector Organisations. So just in case you weren't sure what those acronyms stood for, that's what they are.